Crime and Crime Again discusses true crime content that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Jennifer Lee Catcheway was born on June 19, 1990. 18 years later, that was the very same day that she disappeared. There isn't much information online about Jennifer prior to her disappearance, but we do know that she grew up on the Sconan First Nation in Manitoba, and eventually her family moved to Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. She is always described as having been incredibly loving and full of life, and her family was everything to her. She was in near constant contact with her parents, and she had 3 siblings who, as far as I could tell, she was incredibly close to. Jennifer was reliable. She was the type to always let people know where she was or where she was going to be at any given time. She would leave little notes around the house, letting her mom know where she was headed and when she would be back. And that's exactly what she did a few days before she was last seen. Just shy of her 18th birthday, Jennifer was headed off to visit a cousin, and she left a note for her parents. Quote, "Gone to see my cousin. Be back later. Love you. Put my ice cream in the fridge. I'll have it when I get back." End quote. Her parents had a birthday party planned for her on June 19th, 2008. On that morning, Jennifer called them, telling them that she would be back that evening to celebrate her birthday with them. Jennifer never showed up for her own birthday party. Jennifer's mother and father, Bernice and Wilfred Catcheway, knew immediately that something was wrong. When Bernice tried to go to the authorities about her missing daughter, she experienced the same dismissal that so many Indigenous people have to face when they can't find their loved one and when they know something is wrong. In an article by the Brandon Sun published on October 29, 2020, Bernice says, quote, "The day I reported her missing, I kind of got brushed off. Oh, she's 18, she's on a drunk, she'll be back in a week. I was so upset by this time. I was upset with the officer and said, 'You don't know her. How could you even say that?' And they didn't take my statement. Maybe about 4 or 5 days later, they finally took a statement." End quote. And again, we're listening to one of these egregious stereotypes that authorities so often make about Indigenous people. Their disappearances are brushed off as, "Oh, they're just out drinking. Oh, they just ran away. They needed some space. They'll be back." There seems to be a consistent pattern in a lack of urgency and a lack of compassion in cases of missing Indigenous people. A few days after Jennifer was last seen, Bernice received a phone call from the woman married to Jennifer's uncle. It was after this phone call that Bernice decided she needed to go to the police about Jennifer's disappearance. Now, I couldn't find anywhere what exactly was said in this phone call that prompted Bernice to go to the police, but it was obviously something very troubling. Authorities learned that the phone call that Jennifer had made to her mom on June 19, 2008, her birthday, was not made from Portage la Prairie, where Jennifer lived. They traced the call to Grand Rapids, Manitoba, about 4.5 hours away. This was a little perplexing for Jennifer's parents, as they didn't know how she got to Grand Rapids, and they didn't know that she had plans to go to Grand Rapids in the first place. The RCMP was able to confirm Jennifer's whereabouts in Grand Rapids via photos of her at a party. They also learned that Jennifer was last seen with her 38-year-old uncle and her 28-year-old cousin. Now, this was the same uncle whose wife had called Jennifer's mother and prompted her to go to the police. From some witness statements, apparently Jennifer was last seen in Grand Rapids getting into a truck with presumably her uncle and cousin, and this was around noon on June 19th, her birthday. So at this point, it looks like they were getting in the truck and about to head back to Portage la Prairie, as Jennifer had plans that evening to celebrate her birthday with her parents. Authorities question the uncle and the cousin, and they find out some startling information. The uncle claimed that he dropped Jennifer off somewhere on Highway 6, near a place called Waterhen Junction, and this was about halfway between Grand Rapids and Portage la Prairie. It's kind of a desolate area, and there's not much around at all, so why would he drop her off there? What happened here? Weeks later, the uncle and the cousin were arrested in connection with Jennifer's disappearance. However, they did end up being released, and no charges were brought. And this was honestly as far as the authorities really got in Jennifer's case. About 30 days after she was reported missing, the RCMP in both Portage la Prairie and Grand Rapids had entirely neglected to interview or take statements from anybody else. In an interview with CBC, Bernice said, quote, "I said, 'Did you take a statement?' He said no. And I said, 'Did you talk to anybody?' And they said no. 30 days later, nothing." End quote. So it seems that authorities may have compromised Jennifer's case from the beginning. They lost so much crucial time in neglecting to take statements and conduct interviews for a month after she went missing. At that point, you've lost so much potential evidence, so many potential witness statements from people who may remember that they saw something. Jennifer's case essentially goes cold from this point on. 7 years after Jennifer disappeared, in October 2015, a new witness came forward. The witness stated that she knew who Jennifer was with the night that she disappeared. This witness led Jennifer's family to the Dakota Teepee First Nation in Manitoba, which is literally only about 10 minutes away from where Jennifer lived in Portage la Prairie. The family was also told that there were screams heard in this area the night that Jennifer disappeared. The family searched forests and landfills. They tried to bring in excavators, everything they could to turn over every single possible stone to locate their daughter. However, days into the search, the chief of the Dakota Teepee First Nation asked that the family stop searching until they could present a warrant or have a police presence on site. In an interview with CTV Winnipeg, the chief said, quote, "Our community is getting a black eye from all of this publicity. Now everyone is saying she got murdered in Dakota Teepee, so it makes us all murderers by assumption." End quote. In another interview with CTV Winnipeg just a month later, in November 2015, Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson said she sat down with the chief of the Dakota Teepee First Nation, and they decided that after he originally asked the Catcheway family to stop searching without police presence, they would in fact be allowed to continue searching Dakota Teepee. In this interview, North Wilson said, quote, "The chief and council will allow them to search and say they've never banned them. They just wanted to protect the community from damage with the excavator." End quote. So honestly, it's really unclear as to why the Catcheway family was asked to stop searching in the first place, but it seems that everyone involved came to a reasonable conclusion and decided that, because of witness statements, it's entirely possible that Jennifer was last seen on Dakota Teepee and that they should be allowed to search there. The timeline here is a bit confusing, as witnesses placed Jennifer in Grand Rapids, Manitoba, on her birthday, on her way back to Portage la Prairie. During this trip back, she was apparently dropped off on Highway 6 by her uncle, and a witness statement later on placed her on the Dakota Teepee First Nation, but didn't specify when exactly she was seen there. Here's a clip from that search in 2015 on the Dakota Teepee First Nation, where the Catcheways are searching a landfill with an excavator, hoping to find any trace of Jennifer.
Who wants to find their child in a dump, a garbage dump? Nobody wants to. But on the other hand, I'll take her. I'll take her wherever she is.
And honestly, truly, listening to her family talk about her is so heart-wrenching. It breaks your heart to hear how devastated they are and how deeply in need they are of someone, just the right person, to come forward and tell them where their daughter is. And these endless, heartbreaking searches have been the Catcheways' life for going on 13 years now. The family follows every lead, they follow every tip. They have worked so tirelessly to try to find Jennifer. In December of 2015, the uncle that Jennifer was reportedly last seen with was murdered. Originally, there was a $10,000 reward in place for information leading to the exact location of Jennifer Catcheway. On October 1st, 2020, 12 years after Jennifer disappeared, the Manitoba Métis Foundation announced that they would be doubling that reward to $20,000 for information leading to the whereabouts of Jennifer Catcheway. At the same time, they also announced that they would be paying to put up 12 billboards around the province of Manitoba, showing Jennifer's face, information about where and when she was last seen, the reward for information, and contact information for anybody who has any information about Jennifer's whereabouts. In November 2020, Bernice was given an anonymous letter and a map that indicated where Jennifer might be. In an article by the Huffington Post, Bernice said that when she went to this location, it was an incredibly emotional experience, and she felt so much closer to Jennifer than she had felt in so long. She said, quote, "All I did was cry. I had such an overwhelming sadness in that area," end quote. Here's a clip from Bernice Catcheway's Facebook, which she also shared to the Jennifer Catcheway group. She filmed this video while she was searching this area after receiving the anonymous letter and map.
It is November 5th. 2:40 in the afternoon. We were given an anonymous letter, a map. Somebody drew us a map for an exact location, and we're here for exact location, and there's nothing. We have a couple hours left of daylight, so we're gonna keep looking.
And again, it absolutely breaks your heart. It's devastating and it's soul-crushing to see what this family has had to go through. The Catcheways have spent thousands of hours, searched hundreds of different locations, followed every single lead, every single tip. They have done everything they possibly can to try to find Jennifer. This family has suffered so much for so long. Someone knows something. Someone knows exactly who Jennifer was with, exactly where Jennifer was. Someone knows exactly what happened to Jennifer Catcheway in 2008. And it's time to come forward. It is time to give this family some peace. It is time to allow this family to bring their daughter home. At the time of her disappearance, Jennifer Catcheway was about 5 feet 7 inches tall and approximately 165 pounds. She had dark brown hair and brown eyes. She was reportedly last seen at approximately 12 p.m. on June 19, 2008, getting into a vehicle in Grand Rapids, Manitoba, trying to make her way back to Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. It's possible that she was dropped off somewhere on Highway 6, around halfway between Grand Rapids and Portage la Prairie, near a location known as Waterhen Junction. There is a Facebook group called Jennifer Catcheway, Bring Her Home, and Jennifer's mother Bernice is very active in this group. I will link it down below in the show notes. If you have any information about the disappearance of Jennifer Lee Catcheway on June 19, 2008, you can contact the Manitoba Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Let's bring Jennifer home. If you enjoy the show, please do consider leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps out with the visibility of the show. If you don't listen on Apple Podcasts but you would still like to leave a review, you can do that on Podchaser by searching Crime and Crime Again. I will also link it in the show notes. If you'd like to show monetary support for the show, you can do so on Buy Me a Coffee, where you can make a one-time donation less than the price of 1 cup of coffee. I will also leave that link in the show notes. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Crime Again Pod, Instagram at Crime Again Podcast, on Facebook, Crime and Crime Again Podcast, and on TikTok at Crime Again Podcast. There is also a Facebook discussion group, which I will link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.